Dave's Discount Appliances and Electronics. About 8 months ago, I moved away from the town I grew up in. It was a bittersweet departure, but after I had finished college and was ready to start my career, I knew with unwavering certainty that my rural hometown had nothing to offer me. After finally landing a job and settling on an apartment, I packed my things into my Toyota Corolla and drove for 3 hours to my new home, a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a few miles from my new job. The previous tenant had even left behind a few appliances and dishes. The only major thing missing were a washer and dryer, but a laundromat was nearby. My new job was fine. I worked in IT for a small but established tax firm in the city. Most of the workers were older and didn't know much about computers beyond the programs they used for their jobs, so a lot of what I did was simply networking or installing OS updates. The people were friendly enough, but the difference in age and interests kept me from making any real friendships. On the first weekend after I started, I loaded my laundry into a basket and drove to the local laundromat, Speedy Clean. I loaded my clothes into a machine, put in a few quarters, and sat down in the lobby to wait. The store was empty, save for myself and a middle-aged woman who sat reading a book, while a child that I presumed was her daughter quietly played with a few toys in the corner. She wore a blouse and dark pants, and a small set of reading glasses. A few strands of her blonde hair hung loosely to one side of her face, while the rest was pulled into a tight bun. "Oh man," I said, gesturing to her book. "Why didn't I think to bring one of those?" She looked up and smiled kindly. "First time here?" "Yeah, actually I just moved down last week." "Oh, where from?" She closed her book and held it in her lap, and we began talking. Her name was Linda, and her daughter Chloe had just turned 6. She had also moved here about 2 years ago with her husband, Paul, who was currently trying to fix the washer they had at home. I told Linda about my job, leaving my hometown, my new apartment. It felt as though I was finally making a friend. Eventually, Linda's clothes were finished, and she was ready to leave. "It was nice meeting you, Michael," she said warmly before leaving. "Maybe next time you'll remember a book." She gave me a playful wink and left, Chloe following closely behind after waving to me shyly. The following weekend, I was back at Speedy Clean, sitting and waiting patiently, this time with a book in hand. I barely noticed the door open. "Oh, well, look who it is!" Linda exclaimed. "And he's got a book now." I laughed. "Hi, Linda. Paul still working on the washer?" She rolled her eyes. "That man has never known when to give up, but coming out here isn't so bad." She carried her basket of clothes to a machine and started it before coming back. She asked me about my job. I asked her about Chloe and her family. Once again, we had a pleasant, polite conversation before my laundry finished, and it was time to leave. For the next few weeks, I looked forward to going to the laundromat and having a conversation with Linda. I didn't have any romantic feelings towards her, nor did she for me, but I didn't really know anyone else in this area, and it was nice to have someone to talk to. As the saying goes, however, all good things must end. Winter began to settle in, and going out in the cold and occasionally heavy snow was turning into more of a chore than I cared to deal with, even though I knew it meant I may not see Linda or her daughter again. I knew it was time to start thinking about getting my own washer and dryer. One morning, on the way to work, I noticed a small appliance store that I hadn't seen before. A large glowing sign out front read, "Dave's Discount Appliances and Electronics." I was surprised that I hadn't seen it before, and I didn't think much of it at the time. It's easy to zone out while you're driving, and I had a habit of putting on music or a podcast and running on autopilot when I drove. In retrospect, I don't think it was a coincidence that Dave's Discount Appliances and Electronics appeared just as I was considering buying a major appliance. If circumstances had been different, I have no doubt that the small brick building would have been Dave's Used Cars or Dave's Discount Mattresses. Predators very often change their appearance to attract prey. It was past dark on a Tuesday evening when I decided to stop by the little store. It had been raining for most of the day, and it was cold. I left work around 7:30 and wanted to at least browse the store on my way home. Maybe get an idea of what models and price points I could consider. I pulled into the parking lot, my windshield reflecting the big glowing red Dave's sign. The storefront was bright and appealing, looking out of place in the surrounding darkness and rain, like a carnival during a hurricane. Thinking back now, it looked a little too welcoming, but at the time I was excited to go inside, if only for a brief moment to assess which appliance I could reasonably afford without starving to death. I walked in and immediately found the interior of the building was much larger and cleaner than the outside suggested. There were aisles and aisles of televisions, game consoles, computers, stereos, and appliances, some lightly used and others brand new. I walked through the store, admiring the shiny new refrigerators with built-in cameras and cell phone chargers, and the ovens with built-in microwaves and cell phone chargers. I browsed briefly at the stainless steel washers with multiple cleaning modes, and of course, the obligatory cell phone chargers. I finally made my way to the washers and dryers, and was considering the advantages and prices of a couple lower-end models when a voice startled me. "Not feeling entirely decisive today?" I spun around and saw a man I judged to be in his late 40s, smirking at me slightly. He wore a dark button-up shirt with vertical stripes, light tan pants held up by suspenders, a straw fedora, shining white shoes, and a pale yellow vest. "Not entirely," I said, trying to sound friendly. "Well, who could blame you? It's a big choice, after all, and the devil really is in the details." "Yeah," I said, trailing off. There was something odd about the man, but it wasn't immediately alarming. He seemed eccentric, but ultimately harmless. "You know, maybe neither of these are for you," he said, seeming thoughtful. "I bet I have something in the back that might interest you a lot more." Finally, I realized this guy worked here. Perhaps just a salesman, perhaps Dave himself. But in either scenario, he wasn't someone to be afraid of. Just a man doing his job. I smiled, feeling relieved and foolish for not realizing this sooner. "Oh?" I asked, much more at ease. "What do you have in the back?" The man smiled and motioned toward a door near the end of the aisle. Before I realized what I was doing, I was following the man through the door and into the storage area. Past the door were the long dark corridors of a storage room that I expected to see. Shelves of home appliances and electronics sprawled before me as far as I could see in the dim light. The man in the yellow vest led me deeper into the room, turning left, then right, left again, another left, a right, and soon I completely lost my sense of direction. The man kept walking and I kept following, lost save for my unspeaking guide, increasingly uncomfortable in the heavy silence. I cleared my throat before speaking. "This building looks bigger from in here than it does from the outside." My voice echoed in the dark open room before fading away into the silence. The man had no discernible reaction, continuing through what was increasingly feeling like a large labyrinthine warehouse rather than a storage room. Minute after minute passed. I felt an increasing urge to turn back and leave, but knew there was no way I could quickly find my way back to the door. As we continued, the already dim light seemed to grow even dimmer. Soon the path ahead was dark except for a few flickering lights, which buzzed loudly overhead, threatening to darken once and for all at any moment. The inventory now was noticeably different than when we had first entered. The new flat screens and home entertainment systems had given way to much older appliances, VCRs, 10-disc CD players, Walkman radios, and other obsolete pieces of technology lined the aisles as I walked past them. I could see a thick layer of dust on these items in the flickering light. These old pieces of tech were unsettling by themselves, but among them were other appliances and pieces of technology that I didn't recognize at all. There was a box with a picture of a delighted little boy wearing a blue shirt and a black helmet with over a dozen cables plugged into it, all leading into a small black box. I recognized the Memorex logo on the top, but the product itself was called a memory hat. As I looked closer, I began to question the look of joy on the child's face. He was smiling, but his eyes were wide, manic. We passed several other strange products, including an Easy Cook oven, which seemed a lot like the Easy Bake ovens I remember being advertised when I was younger, except this particular product seemed marketed towards children of both genders. And there on the box art, almost hidden, was what looked like the tail of a cat poking out from the door of the oven, as if the children on the box had shoved the family pet into the tiny opening to make a roast. There was a small box tucked between two large cassette players with the Atari logo on it, but the LifeSpark wasn't a game console I recognized, nor did I recognize any of the advertised games. I couldn't imagine that such titles as Accountant 3000 or Pasta Eat were very popular, but at least one of the games, Baby Trouble, had apparently warranted 2 sequels, as Baby Trouble 2 and Baby Trouble Antarctica were also advertised on the box. I kept walking. I tried to speak to the man a few more times, and each time my words hung in the silent air, completely unacknowledged. Finally, I quickened my pace, reaching to grab the man by the shoulder. But as I moved faster, so did he. I moved even faster, speeding up to a jog, and then an outright sprint. But no matter how fast or slow I moved, the man remained infuriatingly out of my reach. By this point, I was in full panic. I stopped running and put my hands on my knees, panting. The man stopped too, still facing away from me. "What the fuck is going on here?" I yelled. Again, my words echoed through the maze of electronics. And again, the man gave no indication that he heard me. We stood that way for a moment before the man started walking again. I felt myself being pulled after him as though by some invisible rope. I tried to resist, but couldn't slow the pull for even a second. I was being dragged effortlessly, the soles of my shoes sliding on the smooth concrete floor of the warehouse. I screamed and flailed against whatever unseen force was moving me, but nothing seemed to have any effect. The man continued walking, showing no sign of effort. He didn't even look back at me. We continued this way for what felt like hours. My legs were sore, my mouth was dry, and my throat raw. I had finally stopped resisting and instead found myself walking behind the man once more, looking at the shelves around us, hoping to find anything that might be useful. To my surprise, the man finally stopped and turned around, grinning at me in the dimly lit row of outdated and possibly alien electronics. "We finally arrived, Michael," he said cheerfully, clapping his hands together in excitement and giggling. He turned again, and in front of us I could barely make out a heavy red curtain at the end of the aisle. He opened it and motioned for me to go inside. I sighed heavily and walked past the man, knowing it would do no good to argue. The room behind the curtain had no discernible lighting. As my eyes adjusted, I could see what looked like a single chair in the middle of the room, facing a large tiled wall. "Go ahead," the man said. "Have a seat. You must be awfully tired from the walk." I was tired, but when those words left the man's lips, a wave of exhaustion washed over me as if I had been sedated. I tried to move to the chair and nearly fell to the floor, barely able to support my own weight. A few heavy steps later, I collapsed into the chair, feeling as if I had just crossed a desert. I heard a click, and a white light washed over the room from hundreds of old CRT computer monitors in front of me, which I had mistaken for a solid wall. The screens seemed to continue unbroken for as far as I could see in any direction, all displaying a symbol that resembled an eye with a vertical reptilian pupil. I could almost feel the eyes watching me, burrowing into my soul and seeing all of my secrets laid bare. I tried to stand up, but couldn't. I tried to speak, to ask the man in the yellow vest what the hell all of this was, but the words seemed stuck in my throat. "Please be patient, Michael. Can I call you Mike? Please be patient, Mike. I know this is a lot to take in. I promise, all of your questions will be answered very soon now." The man pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. In a wave, the screens began to change, one by one. The dusty monitors lit up with different scenes, each only a few seconds long, repeating in a loop. I would have been relieved that the strange symbols were gone had I not been horrified by what replaced them. The scenes all depicted me, in chronological order from left to right, at different times throughout the day. In front of me, the screens showed me from behind as I looked right now. I could see myself sitting in the chair, watching the screens change. I looked behind me, trying to discern where the cameras could be, but only saw a blank white wall and a matching ceiling. As I turned back, I could see the version of myself on the screen turn around as well, before the scene reset and played again. To the left of the screens, in front of me, were various repeating scenes of our walk through the warehouse, and to the right I could see the scene of the man in the yellow vest dragging the chair I was sitting in further down the wall of monitors, with me still inside it, apparently struggling to move. I tried to speak again, and this time succeeded. What the hell is this? This is you, Mike. This is all you, every bit of it. I felt the chair lean back, and a moment later the man was dragging me backwards along the wall of monitors, just as some of them had shown. I struggled to stand up and couldn't. As we passed the monitors, I watched the scenes they depicted, most of which only showed me a third-person perspective of myself being dragged. Eventually, I noticed the scenes showed the man stopping and spinning my chair back towards the screens, and a moment later, he did. From here, I could again see myself staring at the monitors, but now the screens on the right were black. The man pressed a button on his remote again, and one of the monitors on the right came to life. I could hear the monitor warming up, and the static electricity around the screen began to crackle, a sound I remembered from the old PC my parents had when I was young. As the screen slowly lit, it showed a repeating scene of the man turning it on. I began to understand that each screen showed a different moment in my life, moving forward chronologically from left to right. How was this possible? Was this some kind of sick prank? What would happen if I ran down the hall and turned on another monitor, or ran back up to the left? Would I see scenes from earlier today? Yesterday? My childhood? How long have you been watching me? The man laughed. Oh, I haven't been, Mike. Not particularly, anyway. You won't be interesting for another few months. Interesting? The man giggled in delight. Oh, yes. Let me show you. The man produced his remote again, this time close enough for me to look at it. It only had one large button. He pressed it. Again, the screens changed. This time, the scenes seemed to be moving from one monitor to another, creating the appearance of a large timeline that scrolled to the right. And I realized the man was basically fast-forwarding through my life. Different moments seemed to move by in front of me on the screens. I saw myself going to work, coming home, eating dinner, then work again, home, dinner, on and on the cycle moved. And I realized these scenes could be from 2 months ago, or 2 months in the future, or last week, or next week. My life was a pointless and meandering cycle of work and dinner that now seemed wholly inconsequential. Ah, here we are, the man said. The screen stopped changing. I could see myself driving home from work on my usual route, listening to some song and singing to myself as I drove. This is interesting? What, do you like my singing? Actually, you're a little flat, the man said. I usually don't give advice, but you should stop imagining yourself singing on stage while you drive. It's never gonna happen. How did you... The man shushed me. We're almost to the best part, he said excitedly, his eyes fixed on the screen. I followed his gaze and saw myself look away from the road to adjust the music on my phone. Suddenly, the car jolted and I lost control, spinning almost completely around in the road. I stopped and got out, a look of terror on my face. In front of me, laying in the road, were 2 unmoving figures, one large and one small. As I watched myself approach them, I hoped desperately to myself that they were some sort of animal, deer, cats, anything besides. The screen shifted to a different angle, and I could clearly see a woman in tattered clothes lying on the road, her face swollen and bruised. Her eyes stared unblinking directly at me through the screen. Linda. Next to her was a smaller figure, a little girl who had just turned 6. Chloe. Her body was contorted in an unnatural shape, her spine bent backwards at an extreme angle. A pool of blood was slowly forming beneath her. I watched in horror as the version of myself on screen began to scream and cry, checking his accidental victims desperate for a pulse or any other sign of life. After several minutes, he stood up and checked his phone for a moment before putting it back in his pocket. What am I doing? I asked in disbelief. Why am I not calling for help? The man chuckled. Help? From who, a coroner? On the screen, I walked back to my car and opened my trunk. I could feel protest bubbling up inside me and realized I was muttering the word no over and over as it became clear what I was watching. Despite my pleas, the me on the screen dragged first the woman, then her daughter over to the back of my car and threw them into the trunk. He slammed the door, looked for observers, inspected the damage on the front of the car, and then climbed back into the car and drove away. The man in the yellow vest pressed the button on his remote and the screen seemed to fast forward. I saw a glimpse of the wilderness near my apartment, myself digging a hole, Linda's blank, staring eyes as dirt fell onto her face. The man pressed the button again and the screen froze on an image of a dirty shovel leaning against the railing of my porch. He turned to me and smiled. "So, what do you think?" "What do I think?" The man laughed again, clearly enjoying every moment of our interaction. "What the fuck is this? Who are you?" "Why, I'm Dave, of course. And you're Michael, who in 4 months will kill 2 people with his car and bury their bodies in the woods." "No, I can't. I wouldn't." "But you will, Mikey," the man said happily. "But there is a way to prevent it." "Yes, what is it? Please, I'll do anything." "Well, you can die." The words hung in the silence of the room. "Excuse me?" "You can choose to die. Right now. You can accept that you will never leave this chair." My mind raced, scrambling to grasp what I was being told. I could choose to die, to end my own life, to save the life of 2 others. We all like to picture ourselves as the heroes of our own stories, altruists who would unquestionably do the right thing when given the opportunity. But here, now, with a real decision facing me, it didn't seem as simple. The man smiled. "Come on, Mikey. What's it gonna be? These people you barely know? Or you?" "Their names are Linda and Chloe," I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "Her husband's name is Paul, and Chloe just had a birthday." I stared at the screens. I was desperate now, broken. My mind was clouded with panic and disgust. I thought frantically about what was happening. None of this was real. It couldn't be. Seeing the future wasn't possible. And even if it was... I looked back at the man, an idea forming. What if I sell my car? Never drive again? Never listen to music in my car again? For the first time, the man's smile seemed to falter. "I'm afraid that's not an option, Mikey. What's done is done, even if it hasn't happened yet." "But surely, now that I know my future, I can prevent it." The man laughed again. "You can try. In fact, nothing would delight me more." The man pressed a button on his remote once more, and the screens above and below the rows we were looking at lit up, each showing a different scene. In one, I was driving a red pickup truck. In another, I was drinking a coffee instead of singing. In all of them, though, I lost control of my vehicle at the same time. In all of them, I killed 2 people. No, not just people. Linda and Chloe. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. The man seemed to think for a moment. "I'm showing you this to offer you a way out, Mikey. All of life is a series of moments. Each moment leads us to a series of choices we must make. What are we going to eat for breakfast? Should we try to fuck this waitress? What shirt should we wear today? Each moment is a choice, and with each choice, a new moment." We sat in silence again. I could feel a deep rage building inside me, replacing my horror and confusion. "Okay, asshole, I took a philosophy class in college too. Why are you doing this to me?" "Oh, Mikey, I'm trying to help you. I'm not the one killing those sweet girls. You are. I'm giving you a way out. The choice you have to make in this moment is whether or not you want to continue to exist, knowing that existence will bring harm to others. Or will you end it and relieve those around you of the burden of your existence? Would not a chicken who would otherwise be slaughtered feel relief if the farmer died? Would the death of a single soldier not benefit the lives of 100 innocent civilians who would otherwise be caught in the crossfire? Each breath we take spells the doom of 100 other living things. There is only one way out, one way to save the world from yourself." Then why is anything alive? What's the point if every living thing suffers at the hands of another? The man shrugged dismissively. I don't know. Who cares? This is the nature of your reality, he said. The only meaning of life is the meaning that we assign to it. And as long as there are beings who believe in this reality, it will continue to exist. We sat in silence again. I struggled to move and still couldn't. So, what's it gonna be, Mike? The man gestured to his bare wrist as if he was wearing a watch. I have other appointments to get to. If it's too hard, I can just choose for you. No, just let me think for a minute. No can do, Mikey. You can't sit here forever. But 3? What? 2? I can't. 1. God damn it, will you let me? 1/2. I want to live. I sat in silence after my words rang out, horrified at what I just said. Excellent, Michael. Simply excellent, the man cried out happily, politely applauding. I looked down at my feet, feeling a disgusting mixture of shame and relief. The man produced his remote once more. And please, he said with a wink, give Linda and Chloe my love, would ya? He pointed the remote at me and pressed the button. The world seemed to fade before my eyes. Before I could comprehend what was happening, I found myself laying in bed in a cold sweat. I cried out in overwhelming joy. A nightmare. Of course it had all been a nightmare. I rolled out of bed and went to splash cold water on my face, trying to get the image of the dead, blank eyes of Linda out of my mind. I laid back down and eventually found sleep. The next day, I passed by the lot where the store had been. The building was still there, but the large boards over the door and windows seemed to imply that it had been empty for some time. This was unnerving because I knew I had seen the building several times. Perhaps even more unsettling, though, was the graffiti on the side of the building. Someone had painted a large symbol, one that resembled an eye with a reptilian pupil. I shuddered. I don't know what happened to me in Dave's discount appliances and electronics, but it hasn't left my mind. It's been 4 months now. I am currently trying to sell my car, but I haven't received any offers, even though my asking price is far below market value. So far, I haven't killed anyone. But there is something else that's been bothering me. See, the man in the yellow vest showed me something else, something I can't remember with absolute clarity. I can remember him scrolling the monitors back to something in my past, some scene from my childhood, something that was impactful and meant something to me even in my adult years. I don't remember what the scene was. In my mind's eye, the screen is just static. But what I do remember is that the man pressed a button and the monitor shut off. As the light from the screen faded, so did the moment from my memory. Perhaps it was advice from my father, or a particularly vulnerable moment that I shared with my mother. Whatever it was is lost to me now, and frankly, that scares the shit out of me. Because yesterday, I noticed something else that I can't explain. Dents, large ones, on the hood of my Corolla. I don't know where they came from. I don't know why there's a dirty shovel on my porch. I don't know why the trunk of my car has a faint scent of bleach. I've been to the laundromat several times, praying to see my friend there, but I haven't. I think I know what happened. I know most of my story doesn't make sense, but I'm going to go out there. I'm going to look in the woods. I'm going to dig where I'm afraid the bodies are buried. And if I find them, I'm going to make another choice. One I should have made in the appliance store.